Here we go, chapter 19. This is the final chapter of this textbook, final chapter of the semester. And once again, make sure you're actually reading the stuff in the book in addition to watching these videos, because I am not covering a lot of details. I'm just giving you highlights, okay? Transitions. When we're talking about transitions, when we're working with children with special needs, we are talking about moving them from one level to the next, from one classroom to another. And as we know, in the way the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is formulated, we have Part B and Part C. Children from 0 to 36 months receive services in a specific way according to the IFSP, generally in the home, right? And then when they reach 36 months, if they are still eligible for services, they are going to receive those in a preschool setting, right? Generally in a public school in Illinois, that's the way it works. So we need to think about that time, around 36 months, where they're going to transition from one way of receiving services and one way of living their lives to another way. They need to be prepared. They shouldn't be rushed. We need to make sure that we are doing all the things we need to do, not duplicating things, preparing the new teachers, giving parents time to adjust to the new schedule and expectations. Because what happens is, so from 0 to 36 months, they may be at home, they may be in a different care facility, a child care facility. So let's think about, I have a child at my old preschool who was with us from when he was born until he was 36 months, and even beyond that, actually. So he we realized that he needed some services. He had some developmental delays when he was, an infant, and so he got those services. He got interventions. He was having therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. That was all occurring at home with his family. His therapists would periodically show up at school too to talk to teachers, so that we could make sure that we were having a continuum of care across all of his places where he was. And then when he was 36 months, he was enrolled in preschool at our school. But he also, this is an interesting thing, also was enrolled in early childhood through Unit 4 schools. So he would come to us in the morning, and then the bus from early childhood would come and pick him up at school, at my school, and take him to afternoons at early childhood. Okay. So we needed to prepare him for that. We needed to figure out how this was all going to work. His family needed to prepare all of this as well. Um, in the beginning, because we didn't know whether we could get him to go on the bus, right? So this is a 3-year-old nonverbal child. His mom would come and pick him up at school and put him on the bus, and then he would go to his other school, right? After we did that for a while, then it was okay. He was okay with us putting him on the bus. So these are things that you need to work on. You got to figure this all out. You can't just sort of go into it blindly. So the IDEA does provide for a transition process. And so if you have a child in your classroom who's receiving early childhood or early intervention services, part of their IFSP or IEP should be, how does this transition plan work? Okay. Family members, of course, are involved in it, and they are, because you're going from an IFSP, which is based on family priorities, to an IEP, which is based on more school priorities. Everybody's going to have to work together. Okay. So everyone will need to have an understanding of the curriculum of the new program and how that's going to work. And then figuring out, based on the current level of performance or skills or development, how they're going to work into that curriculum, right? And that's an important thing to work with the family as well, and whatever teacher. So you For instance, the child that was at our school, his transition team talked to his teacher about what are the things that we're doing at school, that how will that transfer to when he gets into early childhood. Okay. So you are the sending program, right? If you are working with a child, and then, or you might be the receiving program if you're working in a early childhood setting in a public school. So you need to figure out how are we going to work? How are we going to connect this with that child in the middle and the parents' family as well? Okay. It takes a lot of working together, visiting with each other, explaining the goals and the philosophy of the receiving program, right? Asking about what are the child's strengths and needs, and how can we communicate all of this to each other all the time. The parents are responsible for looking at what the best programs are. And in many cases, it's limited, right? So if you're receiving um, services and you have an IEP, you know where that's going to happen. It's going to be at your early childhood program. Okay. But you also want to make sure, if you are parents, that you are watching and talking about, is this right? Is this what should be happening? Um, what do I think are the priorities? Even if you are working with an IEP where it's not as family focused, you still have some input into what's happening. And you want the receiving center, the place where the child is going, to know about what are the cultural norms that you have. Are there foods that he can't eat? Are there things that are appropriate or not appropriate from the family perspective? So you write the transition plan and procedures. This is something that the transition team will work on together, and then you'll put in place the plans to help the child move from the IFSP to the IEP. And part of that is also developing evaluations to monitor the progress. And then periodically you'll have reviews to see how it's working. Is this working? Is the child adjusting? Does the child have problems? Are there problems that we didn't foresee that we need to address now, right? Did the receiving staff, the teachers, the class that he's going to, do they know enough about how to work with this child? Is it working? Okay. Early, like we said, early intervention is done in the home, preschool is done in the center. IFSPs become IEPs. There are differences in eligibility, so you'll need to figure that out. Differing roles for the family, like we talked about. The program philosophy changes because the philosophy and the focus of the IEP, or of the IFSP, so for the 0 to 36, is functional, like um, occupational. What are the things this child needs to do to live, to take care of themselves, to work with others? It's not the academic part, which is what the IEPs are. IEPs are much more focused on, does the child know his ABCs? Can he speak clearly? Does he can he count to 10? The philosophy changes from, we want this child to be able to function in society with other people, to, we want this child to be prepared to and learning specific academic things. Okay, so what are the legal requirements? The IFSP needs to be amended to include the transitions. Okay, so this is the last IFSP that you have, is going to be the one that includes how I'm going to transition to an IEP or transition out of intervention services, right? Um, Depending on the child's development, because it doesn't automatically go from IFSP to IEP. A child may outgrow the IFSP and not need that anymore based on his developmental um, skills and where he is and assessments. The meeting has to take place 6 months to 90 days before the third birthday. Why is it that specific? Why is it that specific? Because at 36 months, 6 months to 3 months is a lot of development that can happen. You don't want it to occur too early, because then you're basing it on development that we're beyond, right? You don't want it to occur too late because then you've missed it, right? Make sense? So even if the child is no longer eligible for services, if they are at the end of their IFSP and they have been ruled to no longer need services after their third birthday, they still have to have a transition plan because they're not transitioning from an IFSP to nothing. They're transitioning to a regular classroom. Okay. The IEP has to be written and in place by the third birthday, by 36 months. So you're working on transition. How are they? What skills are they moving from this place to that place? Are they ready to learn? Visiting the new school, begin with short days and build. All the same things that you do for a transition from um, just being at home into preschool are things that you want to think about for transitioning from early intervention services to preschool. Um, you cannot put a child on a waiting list if they're eligible for services. So if they fall over the summer, you need to think about that, and services cannot lapse. So if a child is eligible for services, they always need to be receiving receiving services. If they develop beyond a need for services, then you can transition them out of it. Records need to go, right? There's so many parts of this. Specific considerations for moving children to inclusive settings. You need to think about it this way. A child who is going from early intervention services to preschool services, which may or may not be early childhood, going from IFSP to IEP, it may be the first time the child's in a group setting, right? It may be the first time they may have been at home with mom or dad or grandma having services in their home and have never been in a group setting before. So that's a big transition. It's hard for parents to see this is my child who's been doing so well at home. We've been doing all these therapies, doing all these interventions, doing great. And then to get into an inclusive classroom and see that there are children who are well beyond, right? The staff in an inclusive classroom may not know exactly what to do with a child who has a disability. So these are all things that need to be considered in the transition program. Now, when you're transitioning to kindergarten, this is a little bit different because it is not mandated. So you go from an early childhood classroom to kindergarten. There's no required transition program or planning, but it's really important that you do it. It's very important to prepare the child to go to a kindergarten classroom, meet the teacher, figure out how you're going to work together, all of that stuff. Once you've done all of this stuff and you've done the transition, you've planned it, you need to talk to the family. You need to talk to the former program about what's happening. And then you need to go back and evaluate. So, like everything that we've done, right? You're planning all of this based on the specific child, the specific family. You're putting it all into action. And then you're going back and saying, what happened? What worked? What didn't work? What could I have done differently? And what do I need to do to help this child now? So there you go. That's Transitions, Chapter 19.